Now, there's been a lot of noise made by a lot of people about hyperinflation, and many people in the financial industry seem to think that hyperinflation is just round the corner. However, I'm here to tell you that Americans don't need to worry about hyperinflation. Hyperinflation isn't going to happen. The reason for this is that it's a lot worse. Now, why do I say this? Well, the Fed and Obama have done everything in their power, or are doing everything in their power, I should say, to drag their heels, to stop the coming crisis from actually happening. And not a single thing in the markets actually reflects reality now. Everything has been reduced to pieces of paper with largely fictional numbers on. And this is being done to disguise exactly what sort of a hole has been dug, and to disguise its dimensions. Now, officially we're admitting to something like $19 trillion of debt. That is to say, America is. Unofficially, many people reckon that that number is getting on for 100 trillion plus. Now, all this is being hidden, and stocks are being boosted by quantitative easing. Basically, there's free money being given away to certain large institutional investors and banks, and they are using this free money to buy stocks. And naturally, they're in competition with each other, so the prices, surprise, surprise, go up. And this also helps to hide the underlying situation. And the American government is lying about numerous figures, not the least being one I've carped on about before, unemployment. As I found out recently this week, the figures that they release for unemployment are around about 35% of the added jobs that they think are added. They're not actually based in fact. They're based on a mathematical fantasy. Yeah, well, it's getting to be my opinion that the entire US economy at the moment is based on a mathematical fantasy. Now, the problem with pushing all of these problems out and out and out until there is no end in sight, effectively, as far as the politicians think, is that it simply makes the situation worse. When eventually someone does take hold of this Jenga tower that they've constructed and pulls one of the planks out of the bottom, the whole thing's going to come crushing down. And this is why I say that Americans no longer need to fear hyperinflation. It's simply not going to happen. It's going to be too fast for that. What's scrap paper worth now per tonne, and how many dollars can you get in a tonne of scrap paper? Because that is how much the dollar will be worth. Nothing. There'll be no hyperinflation. There'll be none of this gradual ramp up of, prices doubling, prices tripling, and so on, as we see in other countries. That's simply not going to happen, because the American establishment has been too good at hiding the problems. The problems have grown too big. The dollar is going to go from hero to zero overnight. So what I'm telling you is that sometime in the next 2 years, maybe 3, at the outside, not only is the brand stuff going to hit the fan, but actually the dollar won't be saved. And preparations have already been made for for the dollar's replacement currency, the Amero, and you can Google it, and yes, it's true, it's not a conspiracy theory, it exists, and the North American Union that has been proposed also exists. One reason for letting a lot of people in across the Mexican border, I would suggest. So what can you do? Well, there are a lot of people who will immediately, at the thought of the dollar being worthless, will just throw up their hands and crawl into a corner and just wish the whole problem would go away. They won't face it. But if you're intelligent, then what you'll do is you'll buy things now that have a lasting worth. And I would suggest that you take your money out of the bank account every month, leaving just enough in there to pay your bills. And that when you've got maybe $500 or $600, you should think about going out and buying some silver. If you manage to get $1,200, you should think about going out and buying some gold, because the time is coming. If you think about it, if money is absolutely 100% worthless, then 1 ounce of gold could make you a king amongst men, because not that many people are in fact holding precious metals. Now there are people who think, oh yes, but I've got property. Do you have property, or is it in fact owned by the bank? Because history has shown us that the first thing that happens in any sort of a financial climate is the banks will grab back as much of the assets that they have out there as they can, i.e. your home. And also, if debt gets blamed for this enormous crisis in the world, who are they going to blame? Are they going to blame governments? Well, they're going to try. But I would suggest that the governments will find someone else to blame. I would suggest that the governments are going to blame you, the people who have the debt, people who have mortgages that are unpaid, people who have personal loans that are unpaid, and a whole raft of new laws and as much legislation as you could possibly dream of will be brought to bear in order to make sure that you pay off what you owe as quickly as possible in whatever the new currency is. Now, this might mean, who knows what this might mean, it depends how unpopular with the general public that the American government can make being indebted become. It could mean debtor's prison, a return to that wonderful Victorian institution where you were locked up and forced to work until your debt was paid off. It could mean all sorts of things. One thing is for sure, at the moment, regardless of how cheap credit is, I would not be taking out any loans for cars. I would not be taking out any mortgages on houses or properties. I would be looking to invest my money in physical assets, and I will include property in that if you have enough money to buy the property outright. But really it's time that you sat down and drew up a balance sheet and you said, this is what I owe, this is what I am worth, and if the two things don't come somewhere near balancing at least, or preferably positive in that you're worth more than you actually owe, then this is time to do something about it. Now, before the problem hits, because when the problem hits, it's going to be too late. Think of a world in which you can't afford electricity, you can't afford gas, you can't afford petrol, you can't afford diesel, you can't afford to run a car. and in many cases you can't afford food or clean water. You're talking about an instantaneous retreat to the third world, and this is what many preppers have been predicting for a long time, and analysing what's going on, I have to say I'm starting to agree with them. I didn't used to. Anyway, I hope you found this, well, probably you found it alarming, but I hope you found it useful and it's making you think. And if it is, then please like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Eroding, harmonic, ionic, bionic, atomic. It will astonish you, it's magical and casual, actual but classical, practical and factual. Eroding, harmonic, ionic, bionic, atomic. It will astonish you, it's magical and casual, actual but classical.